Assembly manual. I don't know why they even bother with this. That'll work. Welcome back to the IE427 Garage, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a hot topic. It's continually a hot topic on any of the forums and including some of the social media pages that have anything to do with Factory 5. That is the assembly manuals. All right, so today we're going to talk about the assembly manual. We're going to talk about the evolution of the assembly manual, and we're going to stick to the actual Factory 5 Mark 1 through 4 Roadsters, because honestly they're the most popular platform that Factory 5 builds. But a lot of the information and a lot of the opinions that will be in regards to the Roadster assembly manual will also carry through to all the other platforms, the 818, the GTM, the Type 65 Coupe, the new truck, the 33 Hot Rod, etc. It'll go right down the line. But what I want to do is instill in all of you out there that are in the process of building a Factory 5, regardless of the platform that you're building, is that there are very good tips. And there is a lot of information in the assembly manual that people seem to glaze right over. And when they do, they get themselves in over their heads, and then they reach out for help on the forums. And you know, you can reach out for help on the forums, and you can reach out for help on some of the social media pages, the Factory 5 related pages on Facebook. But just remember, those guys or gals that may be giving you information may not even have a car. They may not have a Factory 5. So you have to temper a lot of the advice that you get with the information that is actually in the assembly manual. So today, we're going to talk to both of the founders of Factory 5. We're going to talk to both Dave Smith and his brother Mark, who started the company. So we're going to get it right from the horse's mouth on where the Factory 5 assembly manual came from, how many pages it was, and what it is today, and the evolution of the assembly manual and online video courses like this, or the Factory 5 supplied videos that are online as well, and what the future of the assembly manuals and those videos may be. All right, because I have a Mark IV here, I actually have two Mark IVs here, I have two copies of the assembly manual. Now, I do not have a Mark IV assembly manual of my own because I am generally provided one with each car that I build, and that assembly manual goes with the car when it goes to the owner. I do have my Mark III assembly manual here and some other related informational books that I use during my build. So here is my original Mark III assembly manual. Now, this Mark III assembly manual, I believe, stayed pretty much the same all the way through the Mark 3.1 because my buddy John has a nearly identical assembly manual for his later Mark 3.1. With my car, because at the time, Factory 5 did not have a complete kit, I got a donor Mustang, and I used the entire harness out of a 94 Mustang GT. And so what I did is I purchased from Evil Bay a 1994, we call them an EVTM, so Electrical and Vacuum Troubleshooting Manual. And what this gives you is every electrical circuit throughout the entire car. So the turn, stop, and hazard lamps, the computer, pin for pin, everything that's in that computer, ins and outs of that computer, the fuse box, and then in the back, it's going to give you all of the vacuum related hoses and everything that are connected to the heater, that connected to anything inside control-wise that was controlled by vacuum, including the EGR system and including any smog equipment that may have been on that engine when it was produced by Ford. So that, I found, was one of the biggest things for me, because my background in electrical allowed me to just follow the diagram and the color of the wire and know exactly where it went, how it traveled, and what it did on the other end. And I was able to dye it out. That's what we call stripping back everything you don't need in the harness. Dye it out everything we didn't need and basically eliminate about 30 pounds of wiring before I ever put the wiring harness into the car. That's different today. Today, we have a Ron Francis wiring harness that you can get with your complete kit, or if you order a base kit, you can pay for a Ron Francis wiring kit, and it will come with this wiring guide. Now, keep in mind, this wiring guide in here is only 68 pages long. So it doesn't cover quite everything that might be in that thing. When you look at the Ford EVTM, I mean, you can see we're already at 151.6, 152.8, and these aren't page numbers. These are actual system numbers. So it goes all the way to 160.1. So this is by far better if you are more of a techie kind of guy. If you can follow a line diagram or schematics, this is much better if you're using a donor harness, but not many people are using donor harnesses today. So I had these two when I built my car. And now with these, I have the Ron Francis wiring harness manual, plus I have the new Factory 5 manual. Now, when I spoke with Dave a couple of days ago, and I didn't Skype with him. Dave's a busy man, so is his brother Mark. So what I did is I just conducted a phone interview, and I got quotes from each of the brothers. The brothers are very different people. I've known both of them for 26, 27 years. So I didn't think it was fair to just interview one of them. I wanted to make sure that anything the one may have said about the other could be confirmed by the other brother and vice versa. So when I interviewed Dave just a couple of days ago, I asked him on their first cars, was there an assembly manual? And Dave said, yes, indeed there was. And I asked him how many pages it was. And Dave said that he was the one that put the first assembly manual together, and it was 45 pages long. So think about that. We weren't even really calling them a Mark I at that time. These were prototype cars, the first 3 to 10 cars that they put out. 45 pages was the assembly manual. But at that time, you were using basically Mustang parts. So you can understand, since you had to disassemble everything from an actual car, you knew how it went on the new car. And you can understand why the original assembly manual was 45 pages long. Now, the Mark III assembly manual that I have, I believe, has 300 pages? Close to 300. I'm at 262, 264, 265 pages. And I will tell you this. When I ordered my kit, Factory 5 sent a care package before your kit shipped. And so I actually got my assembly manual, or maybe I requested it, I can't remember. I got my assembly manual before I ever got my car. And every day, during my morning ritual, I would read a section of the assembly manual. And when I got to the end, I started back over at the beginning. I kid you not, by the time my car arrived, I had probably gone through that assembly manual 10 to 15 times. I wanted to know it backwards and forwards before I ever laid hands on the car. The other thing that I did is the previous 10 to 12 years before I even ordered my kit, I made myself available to every other person within the Factory 5 community that asked for help working on their car. We used to have events that we would call build parties. So a guy would say, hey, this weekend I'm dropping in the motor, or this weekend I'm putting in the wiring harness. This weekend I'm doing whatever, the front suspension on my car. Is there anybody out there that wants to help me? And I would always volunteer. And what that gave me is it gave me the opportunity, and this is going to sound selfish, it gave me the opportunity to screw up on somebody else's car. Not that I did, but you can see the reasoning, before I ever laid hands on my own. And through that, I've developed lifelong friends in the community that I stay in touch with even to today. So one thing that I can urge all of you to do is, if you have someone in your area, and I do this here at the shop, I'll have people contact me through Facebook. I'll have people contact me through YouTube, through the email address, and I also have people contact me through Factory 5, since we are a Factory 5 preferred builder, and they want to have me help them go through their order form, or they want to see a car in person, sit in a car in person. You know, tall guys, we all have this issue where, you know, if we don't fit in the car, then what? Well, the nice thing about this platform, the Roadster platform is you can build it the way you want, and just about anybody from 4'2" to probably 6 foot, I would say 6'5", 6'7", can fit in one of these. Comfort, you know, is one of those things that is personal. So I'm not going to say you'll be comfortable, but anybody within those size ranges can usually fit. So when you're building, or before you start building, avail yourself to anybody else that may be building in your area, and get to know the product before you start building your own car. And soak up as much of the information that you can before you build your own car. So just as a FYI, the newest manual, and I don't know that this is the newest because you can see it's dated July of 2019. We'll turn to the back of this. I think it was like 500 pages. This one is 526 pages long. So you can see in just the time from the Mark III to a late Mark IV, we've increased the actual pages within the manual by almost 200 pages. All right, everybody. I am working on multiple projects in the shop right now. As a matter of fact, I'm working on getting the wipers installed on the 25th anniversary car at the same time that I'm doing this video for you. But I'm always asked, or the question always comes up, what can I do next on my car? I don't have parts. My suspension parts are back ordered. My brake pads are, back ordered. My calipers, my spindles. And this is one of the things that I discussed with Mark Smith, one of the founders of Factory 5, when I was on the phone with him. The assembly manual was put together in an order in which Mark or Jesper or Dave Smith thought it needed to be. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to build your car in that order. Now, this does take some common sense, and I'm assuming you all have common sense. You can't make putting the carpet in the first thing you do on the car. There is somewhat of an order of things in order for you to continue on your build. But if your spindles are back ordered, or you don't have your pieces for your independent rear suspension, or you're waiting on a drop shipment for your 3-link rear end, there are plenty of things for you to do on your car in the meantime. The absolute first thing that I do is I pre-fit all the panels. Regardless of whether the panels are going to be powder coated or whether they're going to be raw aluminum, I pre-fit every panel that goes on the car. Because as they're shipped from Factory 5, a lot of the panels are just put in with tech screws, and they're not perfect. Meaning the corners may not be exactly where you want them to be. And so that's the time to make sure that all the foot boxes, all the aluminum that goes inside the cockpit, all of the trunk aluminum, the front F panels, make sure all of that stuff fits the way you want it to be before you proceed. Now, one caution. If you're going to powder coat your panels Powder coat them after you pre-fit them. Because trying to drill and rivet panels after the panels are powder coated is much harder than doing all of that beforehand and then just having to run an actual drill through the holes to clean them out after powder coat. So the first panels that you're going to install in the car for permanent, the first ones that have to go on permanently are going to be the 2F panels in the front. If you're building a Roadster. If you're doing a Type 65 coupe or a 33 hot rod or a truck, the order in which you put the panels on may be different. But on the Roadster, you have to put those F panels on in order to put the suspension on, because trying to get those F panels in after, you won't be able to get to all the places where you need rivets on that bottom portion of the F panel where it's right behind the upper control arms. So that's what I do first. Then I remove all the panels if they're going in for powder coat, take them to the powder coater, and then I start working on brake lines, I start working on fuel lines, and I start working on the electrical harness. And the first part of the electrical harness that's going to go in is the one that runs down the tunnel for the rear of the car. Now that would carry over to almost all of the platforms, because you've got sheet metal that goes in, and you want to make sure that you get all of your harness, your electrical harness, from the back of the car to the front, or the front to the back, depending on which way you're running it, before any of those panels are secured into the car permanently. Because it's a lot easier to reach in without panels in the way than it is afterwards, after the panels are in place. So what I'm getting at is you don't have to start on page 1 of the assembly manual, regardless of the platform, and work to page 557 or whatever the newest manual goes to. If you do that, you're going to be one of those on the forums and one of those that's on Facebook complaining, I can't do this because I don't have my parts. So there's plenty to do in the interim while you're waiting on parts. And waiting on parts is just a part of this. And it probably will continue to be for the life of Factory 5. Because they're reliant on other people for certain parts. And sometimes you just have to wait. So on certain things, the order in which you're going to do things in the car, it is very much the way it is ordered in the assembly manual. However, if you look at one of the first things on the actual installation manual is carpet and dash. Now, why that's at the beginning of this, I have no idea. But what you're going to do is come down here to what I just talked about. Before you remove all your aluminum, pre-fit everything. Then you're going to move into what I just mentioned. The engine bay F panels. The suspension. You know, everybody wants to get the car on 4 wheels as soon as they can. And if you're in a position where you're fighting for space, I understand. But think about this. If your build is going to take, let's say the average build here in the shop takes 10 months. Now, due to certain circumstances over the past couple of years, the builds have been longer than that because of supply chain issues. But let's just say you're going to take a year to build this car. You're not building these at a speed of someone who builds these all the time. So a year, let's just say it's a year. First thing you do is you go out and buy tires for your brand new Factory 5 wheels. Well, every tire has a date code. And most tire manufacturers will tell you that the life of a tire is 5 to 6 years, meaning the time span. That doesn't have anything to do with mileage. It's been my experience that in all of these cars, the tires are going to age out before they wear out. And so what you don't want is you don't want your nice sticky tires to get as hard as a rock because you've had these brand new tires in your shop for a year on a car that doesn't run. So my suggestion is always see if you can find an old set of Mustang wheels that will clear your calipers. So minimum you're going to want to have as far as diameter of the wheel is a 17 inch. So those wheels that you see that I have on nearly every one of these cars, as they're going through the build process, are 17-inch Mustang wheels that I got from one of my buddies, Dan Zeil, when he was finished with his build. And I've replaced the tires on there, and they're just cheapies, but they're great for rolling the projects around the shop. They'll take a run around the street if I need to go-kart one of the cars as it reaches that point. But the biggest thing is that you're going to save that date code. So you're only going to get your tires when you are ready for them. And therefore, you're not wasting a year of life of those tires while it sits in your garage as a project. So, although suspension is one of those things that everybody wants first thing on their list, I see that most of these guys now are building themselves a chassis dolly, which is on wheels anyways. So if you can roll the project around the shop, what's the big rush to get wheels and tires on it? But again, it's your car. You do it any way you want. So the order in which you do things doesn't have to stick to the order in which they're printed in the manual. You can do things on the car, and as long as those things aren't getting in your way later on down the line, then you can put things in. You can put the gas tank in if you've already got your rear suspension in. You can actually put the gas tank in before the rear suspension. It just makes it a little bit tougher. On the lift, I don't have that problem because I can get everything from underneath. But you just have to use a little common sense when you're going through this and starting to assemble things so that you don't get yourself painted into a corner and go, oh no, now I got to pull this out in order to do that. So little common sense goes a long way. So what I'm going to move on to probably tomorrow night when I come out into the shop and I'm working is the conversations that I had with both of the brothers. I talked with both Dave and Mark Smith about a week apart, and I wanted to get both their perspective on the assembly manual, the original assembly manual that they started producing when they started producing kits, and how that generational change between all of the marks, so Mark 1 to Mark 2, Mark 3, Mark 4, how the assembly manual has progressed, and with the advent of video and YouTube, how that's changed and what the future holds for assembly videos and so on. So I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow night. So the topic is always raised on the Factory 5 forums and on the Facebook pages. My parts are back ordered. I can't do anything. And my typical response to any thread like that is, there's always something you can do on the car. A lot of guys discount, or a lot of families, because a lot of these are family builds, they discount the importance of putting together all of the panels and pre-fitting them. And although that's probably one of the most boring parts of the project, after about 10 minutes of drilling and riveting panels, you've had enough. It's very important. And I think probably the first thing that should be done on any of these cars, once you get the body off, because the car is shipped with the body on it, pre-fit all your panels. But there are other things you can do. Let's say you've already pre-fit all your panels, and you've got all the panels installed on the car that you need installed for a given task, and you don't have your front suspension parts, or you don't have your rear suspension parts, which in the course of the manual are kind of listed in order. Well, you have fuel lines to run, and you have brake lines to run. When I mention that to people, they'll say, well, I can't run the brake lines because I don't know where they go. And my answer to that is yes, you do. It's clearly laid out in the installation manual or the assembly manual. Most of the calipers, all of the calipers in the Factory 5 manual, are attached to flexible lines. And so Factory 5 tells you in the assembly manual exactly where to put the tabs for the hard lines. So whether it's in the front of the car or the rear of the car, you know approximately where those tabs need to be to land your hard lines. So I always tell people, start there. Start with your brake lines. If your pedal box isn't back ordered, start with that. Get your pedals installed so you have a place to take all of your brake lines. Then next, work on your fuel lines. And again, I don't know where to run them. Yeah, you do. Even if you don't have your fuel tank, there are flexible lines that attach to the fuel tank before you go to the hard lines. And at the front of the car, you're going to have flexible lines from the end of your hard lines that attach to your intake manifold or your carburetor, because the engine moves on the mounts, and so it has to be flexible. So make that your next thing to do. And lastly, start running your electrical harness. You can run the rear harness down the tunnel to a point where you know you're going to land it in the back of the firewall. And you can actually run your front harness along the driver's side chassis rail that goes out to the front driver's side headlight and get that run, and then tie wrap the rest of the bulk in the front of the car. Now you've got that part done. So there's plenty to do on these cars without the suspension, without the brakes, without the rear axle. So as I stated in one of the other videos, don't look for excuses, look for opportunities. So when you're hitting a roadblock, or it seems like you're hitting a roadblock, just leaf through the assembly manual and find something else to do. So I ended up cleaning some stuff here in the shop, and I've got all the paperwork here for not only my Mark III, and then I showed you, I believe, the EVTM for that, but I also have the Mark IV assembly manual for the new Texas build, which is in front of the 25th anniversary car. This predates this manual, which is more of a bound assembly manual. You can look at the edge and it's kind of got binding on it. So this one predates this one. Now I think they've got about the same number of pages. So if we look for the page numbers here in the back, I think I saw this one was like 522 pages. And I want to make sure I didn't misstate the Factory 5 website. It's factory5.com. I think I said it was factory5racing.com. And again, in the Mark IV manual that we have here for the 25th anniversary car, it's 526 pages. So just a few pages extra in the newer manual versus that older Mark IV manual. And I think the cars are only separated by maybe 5 or 6 months. So the Texas car is an earlier Mark IV than the 25th anniversary car. All right, so I'm going to give you guys a little history on Factory 5. Now, you can talk to either one of the Smith brothers, be it Dave or Mark, and they're really both approachable, and they actually both love to talk about the history of Factory 5. But it's always nice to look back and kind of reflect on things. So let me go over some numbers for you while we stare at the 25th anniversary car here. So Factory 5 delivered its first prototype kits, and I'm calling them prototype kits because not all of the Factory 5 vehicles that were first delivered had the independent front suspension similar to what you see in the modern Mark IVs. I think the first 1 or 2 of the cars had a Mustang K member that they fit to the tube chassis that was in those first or the first car. When I talked to Dave, that original assembly manual, and Dave said he was the one that actually put together those first 45-page assembly manuals for the early cars. He told me that those 45 pages were the bare essentials. Basically, if you were going to buy one of these kits and you were going to disassemble a Mustang donor car, that you should have the knowledge, since you took everything apart, in order to install it onto the Factory 5 chassis. For reference, my Mark III manual that's right there, and I think we've already said this, was 265 pages long. And then each of the Mark IV assembly manuals that I have, the Texas car and the one for the 25th anniversary car, are close to 520 some odd pages each. So I think the earlier Mark IV that we have there for the Texas car was 522, and the latest, which is the 25th anniversary car that I have here, was 526 pages long. So when I talked to Dave, and I did talk with the brothers about a week apart from one another, I talked to Dave first, and I asked him about the assembly manual and the evolution of it. The quote that he gave me was that it's a work in progress, meaning not only are they continually refining each of the model or the platform of vehicles that they're producing, or the kits that they're producing, but the assembly manual itself is always evolving. So when they have, for instance, these new front bumpers, I went over, I was so upset. There are now supplemental instructions for the Mark IV bumper hoop because it's different than the Mark III bumper hoop. And when I talked to Dave, he said it's a supplier issue and it's not something that they can control, and so they had to change it. Well, that part of the assembly manual or the instructions for the front bumper have now had to be changed. And so the assembly manual is constantly being updated. I mean, it may not be daily, but at least every few months, if something changes in the way something needs to be put together, they're doing their best to update it. But he also said that with anything, and one of the reasons there's probably 2 or 3 pages in the front of the manual that explain to you that there are safety concerns and everything else, is because there's liability issues that come with all this. Even though you may state in your assembly manual that you're not liable for any of this stuff, there's bound to be somebody out there that's going to want to take you to court and try to get some money out of you. So there are liability issues that come along with telling people how to put something together, because if they don't do it properly, or if they do it in the manner that you tell them and something were to happen, But he also said, and these are Dave quotes, he said the community is one of the best, not only sales tools that they have, but it is also the best assembly manual that they could ask for. Because there are so many people in the community, and I'm guilty of this. When someone asks a question, I feel compelled to answer it the best I can, because I've built a number of these cars and I have an insight on how to put things together and what problems I've run into in the past. So the Factory 5 community at large is actually a great tool for Factory 5 to enable builders to help other builders assemble their cars. Now, I did ask Dave, in all these years, why do we still see all of these complaints about the assembly manual? And what Dave told me is that they can track, basically, just like anything else, you can track how many calls or how many emails or etc. that you've gotten over a week, a month, a year, and what they're related to. So I asked Dave what the percentage was, and he said, on average, between 3 and 5% of complaints are about the assembly manual. Now, I confirmed that with Mark. And Mark had a little bit different insight on the assembly manual than his brother. And here's where I'm not going to create waves, because the brothers know each other very well, and they know what they've said. Dave told me that in the early days of putting together the manual, his brother Mark had some reservations about the manual, and that goes back to the liability issues. Anybody that's putting one of these together should actually know how to put one together before they build a car. Something to that effect. I'm going to tell you later what that quote was actually attributed to and who it came from. But Mark remembers it. So they had a little bit differing opinion on a manual and how it should be constructed. So that's all you get for tonight. tomorrow night when I'm out in the shop, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take about 5-10 minutes, and I'm going to go over what Mark and I talked about on the phone, and then kind of give you the flip side of what Mark and I talked about and how it related to what Dave and I talked about. All right, everybody, it has been a couple of weeks. As I stated earlier in the video, I'm working on this while I'm working on projects in the shop and also doing other videos. So we're just kind of taking this as we can get it. I wanted to go back to something I mentioned earlier in this video, and that is how to find all of the supplemental instructions that go along with each of the models that Factory 5 sells. So basically, the direct link is going to be factory5parts.com. So there, what you're going to do is you're going to actually go onto the page, and then right here at the top, it's going to say instructions. And you click on that, and then it's going to give you all the instructions for all of the different models and all of the supplemental instructions that are in PDF form. And what I like to do is I like to actually download those onto my computer. So for instance, I've done a number of Coyote. So I have both the Gen 2 and the Gen 3 installation instructions from Factory 5 on my computer, and that way I can just go between the two of them depending on which particular engine I'm installing. So you can see they're all the way down to right-hand drive Coyote install instructions. So if you're doing one of these builds and you're in one of the countries that, you know, the steering wheel is on the other side, there are even instructions for that. So there's the Roadster. We'll scroll down, and then we'll go to the Hot Rod and the 35 pickup truck, the Type 65 Coupe, the GTM, the 818. So you can see there's pretty much every model in here and every single option that Factory 5 sells, and then all of the supplemental instructions as well. So, for instance, generally you'll get with your kit, if you're doing a Coyote install, you'll get the supplemental instructions in almost like a loose leaf type of folder. But this way, having them on your computer, you never lose them. You know what I mean? You know where your computer is. It's kind of hard to lose your computer. So you can go here and you can download any one of these instructions that you need to install. The way to find the website from the Factory 5 main website is you're going to come over here on the right-hand upper corner of the screen, and it says parts. So if you click on that, it's just going to take you over to factory5parts.com, and again, you're going to come up here to instructions. So that's where you're going to find all those supplemental instructions. Okay, I mentioned earlier how the two brothers, Mark and Dave, had a discussion and disagreement about the assembly manual. Dave was in the camp that, we need to provide instructions for the general assemblies of the car. And that's why in the early days of Factory 5, there was 45 pages of instructions on, an order of how to do things, disassembling your donor, fitting some of the aluminum panels and so on. Mark figured that if you were going to build one of these cars, that you should have the knowledge to not only work on a car, but you should have the working knowledge to disassemble a donor car and then take all of those donor pieces and then install them on the Factory 5 chassis in order to build, at that time, your Cobra kit car. So Dave quoted his brother basically as saying something to the effect that if you don't know how to build it, then you have no business building a car. And when I talked to Mark actually said that quote came from Chuck Beck. And I don't know if any of you know who Chuck Beck is. He was kind of one of the pioneers of the Volkswagen kit car type stuff, where they did the Porsche Speedsters and the what are they, the 356s, the Cabriolet, those type of cars. And that quote actually came from Chuck. Now, that doesn't mean that Dave didn't hear his brother say that, and Mark said, he said, something to that effect, but that quote actually came from Chuck Beck. So just remember that when you start on your kit and you have questions about the assembly order or how a particular part goes together, chances are it's in the assembly manual. You just kind of stumbled over it. And so I always tell people, go back and reread that section, or go to the next section or the previous section of the assembly manual, because most likely whatever it is you're looking for is in there. All right, the last thing I want to touch on is video. Now, when Mark started his newest company, which is Smith Motors, I believe is the actual name of the company, but Mark is, currently doing what are called Smith Utes. So he's taking production cars, and basically you're taking the back half of this car off and you're making it into a pickup or a utility vehicle. And when he started this new company, he was an early adopter of the video, YouTube and Facebook as a medium to go over the assembly process with all new and prospective buyers of his product. So earlier when I said Mark came around, that's what I'm referring to. Mark was not necessarily in favor of a written instructional manual to go along with the cars, because again, he believed that if you had the ability to disassemble a donor vehicle, then you had all the knowledge you needed in order to build a new Cobra or a Type 65 coupe. As things progressed, they had more and more models out. So video is one of those things that as he started his newest company, he adopted early on, and he still, to this day, with each new iteration of the Smith Utes that he is coming out with, he puts together a series of videos to go through the entire build process from the teardown all the way through paint and body, so that anybody that's buying one of his new Ute kits is actually going to know exactly how it's done before they have to, go do any more research. They can watch the videos and they can decide for themselves whether they're going to be in over their heads or whether this is something that they can accomplish. Factory 5 has actually worked on quite a few assembly videos, but it's been quite some time since any of those videos have been updated. I don't know. I didn't specifically ask Dave this question, if they're going to revisit some of that stuff when things settle down a bit. They are just hammered with business over there at Factory 5 right now, because with the pandemic behind us, there were so many orders during that time because people were stuck home that they're just playing catch up right now. There were part shortages and everything else, and so they're doing all they can just to keep up with the orders that came in during the pandemic. So if you're watching this years later, just know that was one of the issues that they suffered through during the pandemic. So I don't know if Factory 5 is going to revisit any of the video assemblies that they have done in the past. I think it would be a good idea. What you can do is visit channels like this and see how we do things, and use that as your supplemental instruction or assembly manual. And I think stuff like that will really help you as you're going through the build process. I'm going to wrap things up here. It was just my feeling that we needed to kind of address this because I see far too many comments on Facebook pages and on the forum that the instruction manual is no more than a doorstop. And to me, that just makes no sense. I use my Mark III assembly manual quite often as a reference as I'm putting things together. Sometimes just because I know the page numbers a little bit better, or where to look in those versus some of the newer Factory 5 instruction manuals. But I do use that assembly manual throughout the build. That's why I make sure that when the owners drop a car off, or we have one delivered here, that I go through that assembly manual and just freshen up everything that I think I know about each of these cars that come through the shop. So, as always, I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. If you enjoy the content here, we sure would appreciate it if you do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.